Wow. I have never seen it do this. Um, it actually looks like it has corrected the dimness from my web camera. That's new. How interesting. Okay, I'm going to start reading from chapter 6, Lake of Fire. Persephone, of course, out of all the gods who had ever existed and every person who had ever walked through the underworld, it had to be her. I rubbed my sweaty palms on my thighs and wished for the first time that I'd never heard of Eden. My life would have been destroyed and my mother would be dead by now, but at least lives of billions of people wouldn't potentially rest on me swallowing my pride and finding the one person I hoped I would never have to meet, the person my husband was still in love with, my sister. "Isn't there someone else?" I said with a croak. "Henry," said James, "but he's a little preoccupied right now." I gave him a look. "So what? I tracked down Persephone out of the millions of souls." "Billions," said James. "Possibly over 100 by now. I haven't been keeping track. So I tracked down Persephone out of the billions of souls in the underworld," I said. "How long is that going to take?" "As much time as it does. Finding a needle in a haystack is easy if you have enough time to look through it piece by piece. But we don't have that much time." James pushed himself off the wall and strode towards us. "Then I guess it's a good thing you have me." I eyed him. "What do you mean?" "He means he's going with you," said Ava. "So am I." Despite her bravery, I heard the tremble in her voice. "You don't have to do this," I said. "Either of you. I appreciate the offer, but you heard what the others said. The chances of getting out of this alive will be much better if I come with you," said James. "Just me. We don't have much time to sit around and debate this." What? "I'm coming," said Ava firmly. "That three's better than two. And I won't be any help here anyway. I don't know anything about tactics or whatever they're going to do." James sized her up, and she squared her shoulders as if daring him to refuse her again. "You know that's not a good idea," he said. "The whole point of this is to get Persephone to help us. And you being there won't do a darn thing to convince her." Ava snorted, and some of the color returned to her cheeks. "What, and you being there will? You know I'll follow you, even if you tell me not to, so you might as well not waste your breath. Come on, Kate." She took me by the arm and led me out into the corridor. I didn't fight her, too consumed with the newest addition to the ever-growing mountain of problems. Not only did we have to find Persephone, but somehow I had to talk her into risking the rest of her eternal life to help the family she'd abandoned. This wasn't some walk through Central Park. This was the four of us facing the most powerful being that had ever existed, and I had absolutely no idea what to say to convince Persephone to join us. We didn't bother with goodbyes. The others must have known James and Ava were going with me when they didn't return to the throne room, and none of them came to find us while we packed. James and Ava and me, once I learned how, could create what we needed, and none of us needed to eat in the underworld, not in our immortal bodies. James was adamant we bring supplies anyway, including a change of clothes and sneakers I hadn't had time to break in. James and Ava were used to wandering the world with only the clothes on their back. I'd never hiked farther than a few miles before. At the last minute I slipped the flower Henry had made me, the one with the pink quartz petals and pearls, into my pocket. It was all I had of this other than what was in his wardrobe. Leaving Pogo behind was the hardest part. I cuddled him to my chest and buried my nose in his fur for a few brief moments before we left, and when I sat him down on the bed, his liquid eyes nearly broke my heart. "He'll be okay," said Ava, leading me out of the bedroom. "The others will take good care of him, and he'll be here waiting when we all come back." Except I might never come back to the place again, not if I had any chance of setting Henry free. Other than offering Calliope a trade, there was nothing of the three of us could do than fight her that the others hadn't tried, and I was pretty darn sure she wouldn't give in out of the goodness of her heart. I tore my eyes away from Pogo, and he barked as the door clicked shut. Taking a deep breath, I swallowed my tears, refusing to let myself cry. He would be fine, and Henry would be there to take care of him if I didn't return. Like Persephone's garden, at least he would have something to remember me by. That was such a horrible thought that I immediately pushed it out of my mind. I wasn't going to die. I didn't want to, and James and Ava wouldn't let me anyway. There had to be another way, and we would have time to figure it out. I didn't look back as we started down the path that led away from the palace, between the columns of black rock. The cavern was huge, and by the time we reached the wall, my leg ached so badly that every step felt like I was walking on knives. What now? I said. There was nowhere to go, and as far as I could tell, there were no hidden caves or tunnels. Remember that trip we took down here? Said James, taking my hand. His warm palm dwarfed mine as I glanced at Ava to see if she had noticed, but she was busy staring at the cavern wall. I didn't have time to worry about the ground dropping out from underneath me again. Without warning, James walked into the rock, pulling me with him. Instinctively, I shut my eyes and braced for impact, expecting sharp pain as my forehead hit the jagged edge, but all I felt was a faint breeze in my hair. What the? I opened my eyes and my mouth fell open. We weren't in the underworld anymore. Instead, we stood in a lush garden with trees as tall as the bright blue sky, and exotic flowers surrounded us, turning toward us as we appeared. Welcome to the other world, said James, or at least the part of it where the souls stay. Come on. He led me down a dirt path with Ava trailing behind us, strangely quiet, for all of the wonder that surrounded us. I stared at the giant floor as we walked by, unable to hide my awe. It was as if I'd stepped into a fairy tale, or fell down the rabbit hole. What is this place? I said. Is the entire underworld like this? No, said James. Look. He pointed through the trees at a girl swinging back and forth on a rope made of vines, her long hair swaying in her movements, her skin darkened from the same sun that had been replaced by crystal in the cavern before. Who's that? I whispered. Is that Persephone? Ava snorted softly, and I gave her a dirty look. If only it were that easy, said James, with a hint of amusement in his voice. Only the 6 siblings and Henry's queen can travel like that down here, and since you haven't learned how yet, we've got a hike ahead of us. That girl's the reason we see all this. Henry took you down into the underworld once, right? I nodded. He'd done it to comfort me, to show me that my mother would be all right after the cancer won and she died. I hadn't known at the time that my mother was actually immortal. That would have helped a little more. Central Park, I said. That was what it looked like to me. It's where my mother and I used to go on summer afternoons. That's so sweet, said Ava, looping her arm in mine. Mine would be Paris, I bet. I could spend a millennium there and never get bored. We both waited for James's answer, but instead he looked back at the girl in the distance. This is her Eden. Because we're immortal, the underworld adapts to the closest mortal soul. Her. The underworld adapts to the closest mortal soul, her. Anywhere she goes, this is what she'll see, and as soon as we get close enough to someone else, it'll change. I watched her swing back and forth, her face tilted toward the sun and a smile dancing on her lips. She looked happy, the kind of happy I wished I could be. She's alone. Are they all alone? James gestured for us to follow. Didn't Henry? He stopped and grimaced, and I bit back a retort. No, Henry hadn't filled me in. It depends. It's part of what you're going to be doing. Some people are reunited with loved ones, others aren't. Sometimes people spend their time alone, and half of it with loved ones. There's no hard and fast set of rules. The person has the kind of afterlife they expect, or at least the one they think they deserve. Oh, that. And if there were any questions or discrepancies, that was where Henry and I came in. He explained that part, I said. Some people really spend the rest of forever alone. Ava's grip on my arm tightened and I squeezed back. That didn't sound like heaven to me. You need to forget your expectations, said James, as we picked our way around an enormous weeping willow the color of cotton candy. Everyone's different. Sometimes religion plays a part, sometimes it doesn't. Henry will explain all of this to you. Only if we all returned in one piece. I knew what happened to mortals after they died. But it came to me. But if it came to it, if killing me was enough to convince Calliope to help subdue Kronos before he escaped, what would happen to me now that I was immortal? I would fade, I knew that much, but what did that mean? I'd always believed in some sort of afterlife, even before I'd met Henry and discovered the truth. The belief had kept me sane during the years I'd spent watching my mother die, knowing I would see her again when it was over for me, too. I had no such certainty now. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice when the sky grew dark again. The sun was gone, replaced with the cavern walls from before, but this time the light didn't come from crystal. We stood on the banks of a lake of fire. Flames flickered toward my feet, and as I took a startled step back on black sand, James and Ava began to walk around it as if it were nothing more than an annoyance. And then I heard the screams. They echoed through the cavern, filled so much agony that I could feel it in my bones. A man cried out in a language I didn't understand, and horrified, I squinted into the fire. He hung from chains that faded into nothingness before they reached the ceiling. The lower half of his body was immersed in the lake, and his expression was twisted in pain I couldn't imagine. His skin melted from the bone, dripping down into the fire, but as soon as it disappeared, new flesh replaced it. He was being burned alive again and again without relief. His screams reverberated through the cavern and embedded themselves in my memory, too tormented for me to ever forget them. I couldn't look away, and the urge to do something, anything, rose within me, too strong to be ignored. We have to help him, I said, but Ava held me back. I struggled against her, and James hurried toward us, taking my other arm. And how do you intend to do that? He said. By walking in there and burning up as well? I can't die, I said, through gritted teeth as I tugged against them. Remember? That's no reason to put yourself through that kind of pain, said James. You might not feel it on the first step, but you were mortal 6 months ago, and your body hasn't forgotten that. You wouldn't make it 5 feet, let alone there and back. Whatever he did, he believes he deserves it. I gaped at him, horror-struck. He thinks he deserves being burned alive for eternity? What could possibly be that bad? I don't know, he said. When you're queen, you can find out for yourself. Now let's go. We don't have time to waste. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the man as James and Ava forced me to walk around the lake. Even after the underworld turned into a rolling field with a yellow cottage nestled in the middle, I heard his screams echoing in my mind. At least James had confirmed what I'd suspected. My body was adjusting, but it still remembered what it was like to be mortal. Glass bounced off my skin. I could fall from the top of the Empire State Building and walk away without a scratch, but I could feel the burn of fire. How long before I don't feel pain anymore? I said, my voice trembling. It's different for everyone, said James. Maybe a few months, maybe a few years. It's your mind that's doing it, not your body. But it will go away, I said, eventually. What about pleasure? Ava slipped her hand into mine. Kate, if none of us could feel pleasure, do you really think we'd do half the things we do? I managed a faint smile. Good point. We walked in silence, passing through the place after place after place. Some of them were as wonderful and lush as the garden, others were full of pain and torture. I all but ran through those, my head down as I tried to ignore the screams. Eventually they all blended together, forming a chorus of pain, and the more I heard, the more certain I became that Henry and the council had been wrong. I could never do this. I could never sentence people to that kind of eternity, no matter what their crimes had been. Time lost all meaning as we wandered. James seemed to know where he was going, leading the way once he was sure I wasn't going to try to run and help people as we passed, and Ava hung on to me. I lost count of the number of places we walked through, dozens, 100. I couldn't remember them all. My feet ached and my leg felt as if the bone was breaking with every step I took, but finally, in the middle of the forest, James stopped and set his bag down. I think it's a good idea to rest. He collected firewood while I sat down on a fallen tree and hid my face in my hands. Ava sat beside me and rubbed my back. I can't do this, I whispered. I don't know why you thought I could, but I can't. Can't do what? Said Ava soothingly. I can't make those decisions, I said. I can't send anyone into that kind of eternity. I don't care what they did. No one deserves that forever. Selfishly, I wondered if giving in to Calliope was the easiest option. At least then I wouldn't have to rule out the underworld. Oblivion was a price I was willing to pay if it meant that I never had have those billions of lives resting on my conscience. You heard James, said Ava. It only happens if they think they deserve it. And what if they don't? What if they think they do because someone had told them again and again? She opened and closed her mouth, and it took her a moment before she said anything. I don't know, she said. I guess that's where you come in. I shook my head bitterly. No one deserves anything. There's no one keeping score. Why can't everyone be happy for eternity, and no one has to suffer? I don't know, said Ava softly. I'm sorry, but this isn't my thing. It's not James either. It's Henry's, and maybe Persephone's. She could probably tell you. Great, I muttered. The two people who can explain it are either being held hostage or wanting nothing to do with this anymore. I'm sure the first thing Persephone's going to want to do after we interrupt her is tell me all about the thousands of years she spent doing this. No wonder she gave up her immortality and ran. Don't, said James from behind us. I jumped. He was closer than I thought. Persephone went through hell. She deserves little happiness. There was that word again. I didn't care what Persephone deserved. I cared about what she'd done and why. That's exactly why this might be all for nothing, I said. If she won't help us, then what? Persephone's a better person than you think, said James. Henry's probably filled your head with all sorts of stories about how he's the victim, but they both were. He was stuck with a wife he loved, who didn't love him back, and she was stuck with a husband she didn't love, and a job that made her miserable. Don't hate her for that. I fidgeted. The only other time I'd seen James like this was when he confronted Henry about making me stay in Eden Manor after I'd tried to leave, and seeing James's anger and disapproval made me want to crawl under the log and hide. I don't hate her, I said quietly. I hate that she was something to Henry and that I'll never be. I hate that she could do this darn job without feeling ready to jump into a lake of fire herself, and Henry's never said a word against her. With his mouth set in a thin line, James set down the pieces of wood he collected and started to build a small teepee that reminded me of the fries that he used to treat like Lincoln logs back in Eden High School before I'd known that he was God. Before any of this had ever happened. She and Henry had thousands of years together. You barely had one. Give it time. I'm not going to tell you again that Henry loves you, said Ava. You can choose to believe me or not, but I wouldn't lie to you. I know you wouldn't, and I believe you, but you didn't see how he acted around me, no matter how many years we had together and how much he loved me. I knew he would never love me as much as he loved Persephone. He couldn't love two people that much. It was impossible. James finished arranging the wood. Rubbing his hands together, he held them as if he were trying to get warm. A moment later, the wood crackled, and the sticks burst into cheerful fire. He acts like that with all of us, but it doesn't mean he doesn't care. It wasn't all of them, though. I was supposed to be his wife, his queen, his partner. So I'm supposed to accept that having a husband who never touches me is fine? You're the one who decided to do this, said James, and I glowered at him. Don't give me that look. I've warned you he wasn't going to act the way you expected. It's not his fault for being himself. So it's my fault for pushing him? I said, and the moment it was out, I knew it was true. My face reddened. I hated the desperation that filled me, making it impossible to see logic and reason. I hated the part of me that was capable of acting this way. All I wanted was to know he cared, that he wasn't doing this because he had to. I didn't want to force him, but he wasn't doing it on his own, and I didn't know what to feel anymore. Not when I was giving up my entire future on a maybe. I touched the flower made of pink quartz and pearls in my pocket. The things he said to me before the ceremony. His insistence that he wanted me there. It was enough. It had to be. Yes, said James, oblivious to how deeply the word cut me. It's your fault. You accepted this, for better or for worse, and you need to give it more than a day. I appreciate what you're going through, but beating yourself up about it right now isn't going to solve anything. Toughen up. Get it through your head that Henry does in fact love you, and move on. We have more important things to do. James was right. I had to get it together. We had to do this first, and then I could figure things out with Henry if I ever got to see him again in the first place. As I replayed the ceremony in my mind, those last few minutes I'd seen him, I squeezed my eyes shut and took a shaky breath. I hesitated. Silence, and then Ava said in a small voice, "What?" "During the coronation. When Henry asked me if I was willing, I hesitated." "I noticed that," said James, "and when I looked at him, he was leaning up against a tree with his arms crossed and his expression drawn." Of course he'd noticed. "It doesn't mean anything, so don't read into it. It was your right to hesitate." "James," said Ava, and he shrugged. "It is. You know it is. We can pretend that this is only about Henry, and that Kate is nothing but lucky, but remember that it was like when you gave up humanity. It was not an easy transition. Whatever I had then was nothing compared to what I have now with all of you. Everyone loves me here," said Ava, and James smiled faintly. "Yeah, we're all a little in love with you," he said, "but that's only because you're dynamite in bed, otherwise you're a pain in the—" Ava reached out to smack him, and as the earlier tension dissipated, I struggled not to picture the two of them together. "You two?" I said in a strangled voice. James focused on the fire, and Ava shrugged. "I am the goddess of love and sex. Yeah, I got that," I frowned. "Is there anyone you haven't slept with?" "Daddy and Henry," she said, and I suppose that was better than no one. "Even though Daddy technically isn't my father, it's still a no-no." "Walter isn't your father?" I said. "I didn't know that." "I'm adopted," she said proudly. "It's a long story, but what I'm trying to say is that Henry does love you, and things are going to get better. This is just the beginning. Imagine how much everyone's going to love you in 1,000 years, and how much you're going to love them too." "Or hate," said James, and I noticed a hint of dismay in his voice that I wasn't used to hearing from him. "They do tend to be two of a kind," said Ava. "Love before marriage is a novel thing, you know. All of our marriages were arranged, and we all had to grow into them, too. It took me ages to fall in love with my husband, but eventually we got there, and it was worth waiting for." My mouth dropped open. "You're married?" "Well, so are you." I gave her a look. "At least Henry was the only person I'd ever been with." "Don't give me that," said Ava. "I know what you're thinking. Admittedly, you're a little young. Daddy made me get married when I turned 100 because he said I gave him such a headache. But you'll see eventually. Most mortals only live to be 70 or 80 at the most. You wait another 500 years being married to the same person, and you'll tell me if you're itching to play with someone else, no matter how much you love Henry." I was pretty darn sure that as long as Henry would let me stay with him, I would never want to play with someone else, but I didn't say that. Not in front of James. If there was ever someone else, our summer together had shown me that it could very easily be him, unless he was married too, and with the way he and Ava interacted. "Who is it?" I said. "Your husband, I mean." In the split second before she answered, I didn't dare breathe. "Anyone but James." "Nicholas," she said, as if it were obvious, and I released the breath I'd been holding. "Out of all the members of the council, Nicholas would have been my last pick." "That's crazy," I said faintly, refusing to look at James. I loved Henry. No matter how tough things got, James wasn't a choice anymore. Maybe he'd been before I took my vows, but what if Henry took one look at Persephone and wanted her back? I shoved the thought aside. I couldn't think like that. "I know, right?" Ava beamed. "He's a good guy. He really knows how to handle his swords, too." As images of Henry embracing Persephone floated in front of me, I struggled to keep up with Ava. "What?" "He's a blacksmith," she said, her eyes widening innocently. "He makes weapons. Anything in the world, you name it, he can make it. And he creates things for me, of course. He also puts up with you," said James, sitting up down on a tree stump on the other side of the fire, "and he's faithful." Ava huffed. "I wouldn't be able to do my job if I was only ever with him. Besides, you weren't complaining when—" James glared and she stopped. Instead of grilling her more about our relationships, I looked down at my hands. Nicholas presumably loved her, or at least felt loyal enough not to cheat, unlike Ava. Maybe she had an excuse, but it reminded me strongly of Persephone, with bitterness curls through me, wrapping around my insides and making me as still as stone. For a moment I hated Ava for doing that to her husband, whether he was okay with it or not. "You're not married, are you?" I said to James. He shook his head. "Not yet, not officially. There have been some mortals, of course, but we've all had a few mortals on the side." "More than a few," said Ava with a snort. "Then why get married in the first place if you're not going to stay faithful?" I said. Ava shrugged. "I think Daddy believed that getting married would force me to settle down, but that didn't work too well." She paused. "Nicholas understands, you know. He knew that he was he knew what he was signing up for in the beginning, and he doesn't mind. At the end of the day, he knows he's the love of my life." "We get married for the same reasons that mortals do," said James. "To create a family, a home, to have that sense of security, to have a partner, and in Walter, Henry, and Philip's cases, to have a queen to help them rule." "Didn't turn out too well for Henry," I muttered, and James sighed. "No, it didn't. A strong breeze made the leaves on the trees above us rustle, and I forced myself to relax. I couldn't change what had already happened. I could, however, control what I did, and I already knew I would never hurt Henry like that, no matter how bad things got. However, a tendril of resentment lingered inside of me, and I couldn't resist muttering to Ava, "If you can stay with Nicholas, then why couldn't Persephone stay with Henry?" She said nothing. The fire crackled, and off in the distance I heard a woman singing, but I didn't pay attention. Many of the mortals we'd passed had been singing, but some of the songs I'd recognized, others were so old that they'd been lost to time except the dead who sang them. "Persephone fell in love with a mortal," said James after a long moment. "She wasn't any different from the rest of us, she just wasn't faithful to Henry before she'd met Adonis either. You can't say all you can't say you're all like that when Nicholas doesn't cheat on Ava," I said sharply. So it hadn't been once, then. Henry had to endure knowing Persephone had been with other people over and over again, presumably other members of the council he'd had to face afterwards, yet he still loved her. "Calliope didn't cheat on Daddy either," said Ava thoughtfully, and I nearly choked. "Calliope and Walter?" I wheezed. "But he's so old." "She's older," said Ava with a sniff. "Besides, age doesn't matter after the first 1,000 years or so. He only looks older because he wants to. He thinks it makes him look distinguished." It didn't make any sense. Not that Calliope was older or anything, but that she was married and would love Henry so badly that she was willing to kill to have him. Then why, I gestured around us frustrated, why are we here? Why are we doing this if Calliope's married and loyal to her husband? Why would she do all of this to get Henry if she already had Walter? James and Ava exchanged a look I didn't understand, and I dug my nails into my jeans. I was already thousands upon thousands of years behind. Knowing there was something they weren't saying only made my frustration grow. "Walter fathered all of us," said James. "Everyone on the council who isn't the original six." "Or me," said Ava. "He was in different bodies and forms, so I mean it isn't gross or anything, but they're all Walter's children." "And Calliope is only mother to two of us," said James, "Nicholas and Dylan." I was silent as the weight of everything that was implied settled over me. I didn't know exactly how long they'd all existed, but I didn't know it was longer than I could comprehend. 100 years sounded like forever to me, but for them it was barely any time at all compared to the rest of their lives. And throughout it all, Calliope watched her husband love other women, and she'd had to accept his children as her family, as her equals. For one terrifying moment I understood why Calliope was doing this. I could feel her anger, her hurt, all of the pain she'd gone through, and her loneliness and desire to be loved. She'd watched Henry go through the same thing with his wife, and she must have seen a kindred spirit, someone she thought would understand and want to be with her, because she would never cause him that kind of pain. Instead, Henry had thrown it back at her, and he'd become one more person to make her feel utterly alone. But Henry wasn't the bad guy. He'd stayed loyal to Persephone despite everything she'd done to him, and my momentary compassion for Calliope faded. In the end, she was to blame for what she'd done, no one else. "No wonder she snapped," I mumbled. "If I had to watch Henry do that to me, I think I would too." "It doesn't excuse murder," said James, "and it doesn't excuse releasing Cronus. No matter how much of an Walter is, she's the one who ultimately made those choices, and we're the ones who had to face the consequences, just like Henry had nearly faded because of Persephone. It doesn't make sense, though. So why did Persephone give up her immortality when she could do whatever she wanted? She had the same deal with Henry as I do, right? 6 months out of the year, and I'm his wife to help him rule, and for the other 6 I can do whatever I want." Ava tossed me a yellow apple from seemingly out of nowhere. I caught it, but I didn't take a bite. "It wasn't like that at first," she said, glancing at James, who was starting off into the forest with a faraway look. "Henry offered that to her when he realized how miserable she was down here. None of us can take this all the time except for him. Most of the council doesn't visit," said James. "Our abilities are muted down here, and crap." Wood sizzled above me, and right as I looked up to see what had happened, Ava shoved me off the log and onto the ground dangerously close to the fire. I yanked my hand away from the flames. A deafening crash turned the world into dust. Coughing, I scrambled to my feet and stumbled, my foot connecting with the splintering wood in the spot where I'd been sitting seconds before. "Ava," I said, choking on the clouds of dirt. "James?" I squinted. Before the dust cleared enough for me to see more than a few inches in front of my face, a pair of hands grabbed my shoulders and yanked me backward. "Come on," said James roughly, tugging me away from the log. "We need to get out of here." "But Ava—" "I'm here," said Ava a few feet to my left. "Go." James pulled me away, and I stumbled over rocks and roots I couldn't see. Another crack echoed through the forest, and I darted forward, futilely covering my head. The second falling tree missed James and me by inches. "What's going on?" My leg ached more than it had when we'd left the palace, and I struggled to keep up. The air cleared the farther we went, and I saw James holding his hand above his head, as if he were trying to ward something off. "Cronus," he said, and another tree sizzled. "He's found us." Chapter 7. Oasis. Out of all the things I imagined could go wrong with the journey through the underworld, Cronus trying to stop us had never crossed my mind. I'd tried to work my way around Persephone refusing to come. I'd thought out what to do if he couldn't find the cave, and even though somewhere deep inside of me I knew there were no other options, I'd been trying to come up with something better than sacrificing myself. Never, not once, had I thought Calliope would figure out when we were coming to send Cronus to stop us. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Not that there was much we could have planned for, other than running for the hills, which is exactly what we did. James clung to my hand as we darted through the trees, and Ava trailed behind us. Between the two of them, they seemed to have enough power to keep Cronus at a safe distance away. That didn't stop the trees from falling, though, and more than once James pushed me aside a fraction of a second before I was brained by an oak or a maple infused with the same fog that had sliced open my leg. I didn't know how long we ran, but it was long enough for my lungs to feel like they were on fire. The trees gave us some shelter. But every time I looked over my shoulder, Cronus seemed to be inching closer. We couldn't run forever, and I was sure James and Ava wouldn't be able to hold him off for long enough to reach Persephone either. And when we did reach Persephone, what help would she be against a Titan? The forest around us dissolved into a desert, and whatever options we'd had before disappeared. We couldn't run forever, James and Ava couldn't fight forever, and it was clear Cronus only wanted one thing, me. Every tree hadn't almost hit James or Ava, they'd almost hit me. The first one had landed right where I'd been sitting moments before. And before Henry and his brothers had gone after Cronus, the fog had slipped through their defenses and chosen me as its target. The hot sand was difficult to run across, and the sky shimmered in the sun. I was already exhausted. If my leg gave out and I stumbled, Cronus would kill me. The only advantage I had was doing something he didn't expect. I dug my heels into the sand and yanked my hand from James's grip. He fell onto his knees, thrown off balance by no longer hauling me behind him, and I scrambled away from him as fast as I could. "Cronus!" I yelled as I strengthened on the side of a dune 20 feet away from where James had fallen. Ava was at his side, helping him to his feet, and both of them stared at me like I was a lunatic. Maybe I was. Maybe I was about to die, but if I didn't do something, we would all be dead, and it was worth a shot. We couldn't outrun a Titan. The fog thickened as it slowed and seemed to join together. Squinting in the sunlight, I thought I could see the outline of a face, but the heat radiating off the sand distorted my vision too much for me to be sure. "You know who I am," I said, trying to sound sure of myself instead of scared out of my mind. "And I know who you are, so let's cut the chase. You can't kill me or any of us." That was a bold-faced lie, but at least he seemed to pause to consider it. The same strange rumbling I'd heard in my vision echoed through the desert, and I became keenly aware of the fact that we were in a vast cavern, not underneath an endless sky. If I could have flown, my hand would have eventually touched stone. "You need us." My words were so like Calliope's that I nearly took them back, but that was the only way. Cronus wasn't going to kill us all for fun. Calliope wanted me dead, and he needed Calliope to open the gate, but she didn't know how. A surge of confidence rushed through me. "Calliope doesn't know how to open the gate. I do." Could Cronus tell the truth like a lie like Henry? The fog inched closer to me until it was only a hair-breadth away. Instead of striking, it surrounded me until the heat of the sun was gone, and I could no longer see the blue sky. I felt light-headed, but I willed my feet to remain planted in the sand. Touching it would undoubtedly mean searing pain, and I couldn't take any more of it, not when there was a long way to go before we found Persephone. I had to do this. It was my only chance, the council's only chance. "If you let me and my friends go, we'll come to you," I said, digging deep inside myself to find all the courage I had left. "When we get there, let the others go. They can't defeat you without Calliope anyway. Once that's done, I'll open the gate and you'll be free." Silence. No rumbling, no laughter, nothing. Fog whispered in my hair, and I squeezed my eyes shut. I only had enough room to breathe. "If you kill me now, the only other person who can do it is Henry," I said, my voice cracking. "He'd rather destroy himself than ever free you. I know Calliope wants me dead, but she's using you. I have what she wants, and since she can't kill me herself, she's making you do it for her in exchange for a promise she can't keep. She has no idea how to open it. She can't. She doesn't rule the underworld. Once I'm dead, she'll leave you locked in that cage. and the other gods will subdue you again. Let me and my family live, and I swear I'll release you when we get to the cavern." I paused and swallowed hard. "I'm your best shot, and you know it." And the thick fog encased me completely, and all I could picture was Henry lying in a broken and bloody heap in the cave as Calliope laughed in her girly squeal. And my mother was undoubtedly a prisoner now, too. I was going to lose everything if this didn't work. "I know what it's like to be alone," I whispered. "Not for as long as you have, but I know what it's like to lose everything you love, and the way the gods turned on you isn't fair. You were nothing but nice to them. You gave them everything they could possibly dream of, and in return, they imprisoned you for eternity. It isn't fair. You have a right to be free." It scared me how easily the words slipped out, as if I really believed them. Maybe secretly part of me did. Not that Cronus deserved freedom, but that I understood what he'd gone through in a way. I'd been so afraid of being alone that I'd given up half the rest of my life on the chance that I wouldn't have to be. "Let me help you," my heart pounded as the air began to thin. "Please, I want to, and maybe we can help each other." The air turned bitter cold as all the warmth of the desert disappeared, and I shivered. I barely moved, but it was enough. The fog touched my bare skin, cold and silky, much more solid than I had expected, like feathers, maybe, or snow. It didn't hurt. Instead, like he'd done to Calliope, he caressed my cheek, and through that single touch, I felt power beyond imagining. It was nothing like the force that Henry and the others had used to chase Cronus away. It was immeasurable, as if the entire universe was compressed into that lone tendril of fog. At last I understood why they were all afraid of him. His touch lasted half a second, and he was gone before I could open my eyes. My mind reeled as I tried to comprehend what had happened, and despite the sun once again beating down on me, my skin felt like ice. I collapsed onto my hands and knees. The coarse sand scraped my palms, but it didn't matter. He'd spared me. James and Ava were by my side in an instant. Sand flew everywhere as Ava fell to her knees, and James hovered over me, his hands an inch above my back, as if he thought one touch would make me disintegrate into ash. "You're alive?" said Ava with wide eyes. As if she weren't willing to believe it, she took my hand and held it like she was the only thing anchoring me to this place. I wasn't so sure she was wrong. "What happened?" said James, urgency and concern warring in his voice. I shakily leaned back on my knees, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't look at either of them. I'd lied to Cronus and stolen any chance James and Ava had of walking out of here alive. I had no idea how to open the gate, and when I admitted the truth, it wouldn't come to that, I thought firmly to myself, or at least as firmly as I could manage with my brain felt like jelly. I'd bought us time. Anything could happen before we reached the gate, if we ever did. In the meantime, I had a little longer to come up with a plan. "Water," I said, my mouth as dry as the desert around us. My lips were cracked and my muscles screamed in protest every time I moved, but I was alive. I trembled like I hadn't felt warmth in years, and together James and Ava hoisted me up and helped me toward a small oasis in the distance. It looked so picture-perfect that if I hadn't known this was someone else's idea of a desert instead of the real thing, I would have guessed it was a mirage. We covered the distance faster than I'd expected, or maybe time was moving quickly for me now that I knew I no longer had a chance of walking out of that cavern alive. The best I could hope for was that the others would leave before Cronus had a chance to strike. They'd set me down underneath a grove of palm trees, and I leaned against one and closed my eyes. I hated being weak compared to them. They'd fought Cronus with barely a complaint, and I couldn't even talk to him without feeling drained. "Tell us what happened," said James. He cracked open a coconut, splashing milk all over his shirt, and when he didn't seem to care, he dipped one of the halves into the pool of water and offered it to me, and my hands shook as I took it. I drank deeply. The deliciously cool water spread through me, and once I'd finished my second drink, I sat up and took inventory of my injuries. My leg throbbed and I was dizzy, but Cronus hadn't hurt me again. I ran my fingers through my hair in an attempt to comb it, but it was too much of a sweaty mess to bother, so I searched my jacket pocket for a hair tie to pull it back. Instead of elastic, my fingers brushed up against something that felt like silk. No, not like silk. A flower petal. Startled, I fished it out and cut the crushed yellow blossom in my hand. It was small, with 7 pointed petals. It looked as if the ends had been dipped in purple, and slowly it began to uncurl. I'd never seen anything like it, let alone picked it and put it in my pocket. And it was alive. It wasn't dead or crushed like I thought it was. In seconds, it was whole and open, and the center looked like a shimmering drop of nectar. It couldn't have possibly come from the surface. From one of the afterlives we'd walked through? It had to be. But I'd stuck my hands in the pockets of the woods before Cronus had chased us, and it hadn't been there then. Had I simply not noticed it? That was the only explanation, or maybe I was too dazed to think straight. tucking it back into the safety of my pocket besides the quartz and pearl flower from Henry. I combed my hair out of my fingers and said shakily, what did you see? Wordlessly, Ava offered me her hair tie, and I took it. It was bright pink. We saw Cronus eat you. You were engulfed, said James as he hesitated. We thought you were gone. I stared into the clear pool. My reflection stared back at me, and I leaned forward to splash some water into my grimy face. I was a mess. Me too, I mumbled as I rubbed off the dirt. So why didn't he kill you? Said Ava. She held a coconut in her hand, and a second later a neon pink curly straw appeared from inside of it. She sipped it, and I could see the milk rise through the swirls. I didn't answer right away. I had to tell them the truth, but they weren't stupid. They would see what I planned to do, and if James and Ava thought I was so much as considering sacrificing myself, they would march me right back to the palace. I needed James to find Persephone. And he would only show me how to get there if he thought he would be showing me the way home, too. That left only one option, avoiding the whole truth. Because I told him I'd open the gate if he didn't hurt us, I said. James stilled, and Ava dropped her coconut. You did what? She screeched. Are you crazy? Do you have any idea what that means? When you don't release him, he's going to kill you. You know that, right? I nodded numbly. So I guess that means we have a limited amount of time to come up with another plan. Ava let out a string of curses and stood, pacing around the pool. We can't let him out. Even if he kills all of us, it'll be better than what he'll do the last minute he gets out into the world. You know that, Kate. Of course I know that, I snapped. But what else was I supposed to do? He was going to kill all three of us, and everyone else is too busy being scared to come after us if something went wrong. You should have done something else. Anything else. Ava's face turned red, and she balled up her hands into fists. I've never seen her so angry before. You don't understand. We can't let him out. We can't. Then we won't, said James. He gestured for Ava to sit back down, and she stood there for a moment as if daring him to make her, but finally her shoulders slumped and she gave in. You did good, Kate. You brought us time. At least James understood. I'm sorry, I said to Ava as I tugged up my sleeves. I didn't know what else to do. It's all right, she mumbled, and she picked up her coconut again to take a half-hearted sip. It's not like we had a better plan. We do have a better plan, said James. Find Persephone and figure it out from there. If anyone can help, it's her. Ava made a face apparently as happy with the thought of the fate of the universe resting in Persephone's hands as I was. At least we don't have to worry about Cronus until we get there, I guess. Exactly, and we don't know how to open the gate either, so it doesn't matter what Kate promised him to get him off our backs. We'll figure a way out of this. James offered us a smile, and she returned it, but I looked at my hands. Cronus was growing stronger by the minute, and no one, not even Henry or Walter, could possibly win against that kind of impossible power. If he stuck to our deal, and let the others go, then unless I wanted to see him slaughter everyone else I loved, I would have no choice but to open the gate. All I had to do in the meantime was convince Persephone to tell me how. Hours after we left the oasis, I found a second flower, bubble gum spotted with blue, waiting for me on the fallen tree as I sat down to rest. At first, the log was empty, but when I lowered myself down, my fingertips brushed the silky petals. It couldn't possibly be a coincidence, but who would be leaving me presents? Henry? I clung to that hope, but he was unconscious. The chances of it being him were slim. And then my eyes fell on James, and I scowled. What? He said, as he leaned against a tree. I held up the blossom, and he arched his eyebrows. Colorful. Where did you get it? I was sitting here waiting for me, I said, but he shrugged indifferently. It wasn't from him, after all. For all he cared, he would have been talking about a dead leaf. Henry, then. I warmed at the thought. He must have been able to see me in the cavern, after all, or maybe he'd figured out what we were doing. Maybe he was trying to tell me that he was glad we were coming to rescue him, only because he didn't know what I had planned on doing, though. We pushed on, constantly checking over our shoulders for any sign of Cronus. Every time we stopped, I found a new blossom waiting for me, and I tucked it reverently in my pocket with a rainbow of others nestled against the jeweled flower. Eventually, our breaks became less and less frequent, and while I missed the flowers, my body stopped becoming tired, and it was easier to continue. I didn't know how long we walked. It felt like forever, although I couldn't have been more than a week. My leg hurt every time I took a step, but eventually the pain faded into the background, giving me time to absorb the beauty and horror of the underworld. Is this really the quickest way there? I said, as another nightmare faded. This time it had been a child burned alive as a mother watched, chained to the ground as she screamed, helpless to do anything. Afraid so, said James, as we trudged up a steep, deep dirt road. Pity this doesn't happen after your coronation. You could have had us there in seconds. Thanks, I muttered, grabbing a fallen branch to use as a walking stick, like I needed another reminder. You're the one who asked, said James, and after that I refused to talk to him for the rest of the day. Now that the danger of Cronus attacking had all but dissipated, I spent most of my time trying to work out how best to convince Persephone not only how to help us, but to tell me how to open the gate without Ava or James finding out. I didn't want it to be an option, but it was, and I couldn't ignore it. And the way he'd caressed my cheek in the desert, if Cronus really was willing to help me in exchange for releasing him, then maybe he could help take down Calliope, and then the other siblings could recapture him. It was shaky at best, but so was everything else about his plan, and at least this was better than nothing. The closer we got to Persephone, the tighter the knot in my chest grew. I ran through dozens of ways to convince her to come, arguments to make her see how important this was, but no guarantee that anything I said would be enough. Through trying to persuade her, I also ran the risk of pushing her away. Between the worry and stress of everything that was happening, I grew quieter, listening to James and Ava talk instead of joining in. When they weren't talking about my deal with Cronus, most of their conversation centered on what the others were doing, and whether or not Dylan had convinced them that it was a waste of time. Ava was certain he wouldn't. James wasn't so sure, and their squabbling grew more and more heated until I didn't know if I could take any more of it. Finally, when it seemed we would never stop walking and they would never stop fighting, James held up his hand, and Ava fell silent. I froze, and James peered through the trees that surrounded us. What is it? Said Ava in a hushed voice. James beckoned for us to join him, and I crept forward, tiptoeing around the roots. He stood at the edge of the clearing, full of wildflowers, and when I glanced around him, I noticed a small cottage with a plume of smoke trickling out from the chimney. Made of wood instead of brick, it was covered with vines of flowers, almost making it look as if it rose out of the ground. It's beautiful, I said wearily, but we need to keep. James covered my mouth with his hand, and I automatically licked him. It was the same thing I'd done to my mother whenever she tried to keep me quiet as a child, though at least her hands were usually clean and not covered with dirt from the underworld. I made a face and spat, but I didn't have a chance to lay into him for covering my mouth in the first place. The door to the cottage opened, and out skipped a curly-haired blonde who looked a few years older than me. She was tiny, and despite the sun shining down into the lush meadow, her skin was alabaster. Beside me, James pursed his lips, and Ava let out a soft snort of distaste I didn't understand. The girl knelt down in the garden beside the cottage door, and she started to pull weeds as she hummed happily to herself. There was something disturbingly familiar about the way she moved, and as a drop-dead gorgeous man stepped out of the cottage and into the sunlight to join her, I finally understood. Is that? I whispered. James swallowed, and my breath hitched in my throat. Persephone. Okay. Before I continue, I'm going to get something from downstairs briefly. I also need to check really quickly that this is still working properly. Oh, it is. Okay, good. Okay, it should be working again. No, um, I had to go downstairs and come back. Chapter 8, Persephone. It might be better if I sit down. She looked exactly like the image I'd seen of her months ago, except her hair was the color of wheat instead of strawberry blonde. We weren't close enough for me to see the freckles, but I was positive they were there too. Henry's memory of her was perfect. Of course it was. What else had I expected? So what? I took a deep breath to slow my racing pulse. The knot in my chest made it hard to breathe. Do we sit here and stare, or are we going to say hi? James didn't answer. He watched Persephone with wide, unblinking eyes, and I wasn't sure he was breathing either. I poked him in the shoulder, but he shrugged off my touch. What's going on? I said to Ava. She too was staring, but she had the same look on her face that she did when she was looking at Dylan, or Xander, or Theo. I almost forgot how gorgeous Adonis is, she said. We should have made him one of us. She wouldn't have gotten any argument out of me, but a strange sound escaped from James, almost like he was growling. I'd have to endure another narcissistic blonde running around? No, thank you. Ava opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off. You're all narcissists. Are we going or not? Wearing a wounded expression, James broke his stare, but neither he nor Ava made any move toward the cottage. With a huff, I stepped past the edge of the trees and walked through the meadow, making a point of stepping around the flowers. No use in risking Persephone's wrath before saying a word. Persephone must have caught sight of me, because she stood and placed herself protectively in front of the man, Adonis, apparently. It was fitting. He looked like he'd stepped out of a movie, with long hair that hung to his shoulders and an abdomen that would have put Henry to shame. It was hard to focus on Persephone with him standing there, and my mouth went dry as I tried to think of something to say. The desire to not make a fool of myself in front of him overwhelmed me, and I immediately felt guilty for being so attracted to him. If Persephone was half as shallow as Ava, at least I now understood why she'd left Henry. I touched the flowers in my pocket. Now was not the time to start thinking like her. Who are you? I demanded. Who are you? She demanded. There was a sharp edge to her voice that forced my attention back on her, but what could she do? Attack me with a weed? She wasn't a goddess anymore. I'm Kate, I said, holding my hands up as I took another step forward. Kate Winters. Her expression didn't soften. If our mother had visited her, it either hadn't been in the past 20 years or she'd never mentioned that Persephone had a sister. It seemed fair. She never told me I had a sister either. I heard footsteps behind me as Ava and James came closer. Even if Persephone had no idea who I was, with the way her mouth dropped open, it was obvious she remembered them. Hermes? She said, stunned, and then her eyes narrowed as she added, and Aphrodite. Lucky me. What's going on? James stepped beside me and set his hand on my shoulder. Ava lingered behind us, and I didn't blame her. Whatever bad blood there was between the two of them, Persephone clearly hadn't forgotten it either. Persephone, said James with a stiff nod. It's been a long time. Not long enough, she said, and she took Adonis's hand, her knuckles turning white from her grip. What do you want? Nothing much, just for her to leave her perfect boyfriend and afterlife behind to help the three of us find the most powerful being in the universe. Possibly free him as well, if she didn't mind so much. I swallowed and opened my mouth to answer, but James got there first. Cronus woke up. Persephone paled. How? Hera, said James, and Persephone furrowed her brow. It's a long story, but we need your help. Persephone eyed us cautiously, and her gaze lingered on me longer than the others. How could I possibly help you? I'm not a goddess anymore, James sighed. Can we come in? She tensed as Adonis hugged her protectively. Envy snaked through me. What would it be like to have those arms around me instead? No, I had Henry. Maybe things weren't going so well, but he was my husband. I loved him. And who else had the ability to brighten my mood simply by walking into the room? I didn't need Adonis. But part of me wanted him very, very badly. It's all right, he said, muscling the crook of her neck. No one can hurt me anymore. I had no idea if that was true, if Cronus could attack the dead like he attacked us, but it didn't matter. As long as Cronus held his end of our bargain, we wouldn't see him again until we were ready. It wasn't a very reliable set of circumstances, but it was better than nothing. "Who is she?" said Persephone, nodding at me. James gave me a warning look, but I stepped forward before he could answer. "Henry was going to let himself fade because of you," I said with more bite than I intended. "He couldn't rule the underworld alone, so I married him." Persephone stared at me as if she could see right through me. It was unnerving, but I held my head high and stared back, refusing to let her get to me. She was under my skin enough already as it was. After a long moment, she turned toward the cottage door and nodded stiffly for us to follow. The three of us trailed after her, Ava reluctantly so, and James gave me another look. I ignored that one too. The inside of her one-room cottage was cozier than I expected. 100 different kinds of flowers hung from the ceiling, sorted by family and color, and I immediately felt at home. As I breathed in the heavenly scent, the tension in the air seemed to melt away. My mother had made exquisite bouquets for every occasion in New York, and by the time I was 10, businessmen paid exorbitant amounts for one of her arrangements. Before I was old enough to take much of an interest, though, she got sick, and after her second round of chemotherapy, she had to sell the business. Apparently, cancer hadn't gotten in the way of her teaching Persephone. Persephone gestured for us to take a seat in one of the two chairs at the table, but James was the only one who accepted her invitation. I stood beside him, making a point of turning so I couldn't see Adonis, and Ava lingered near the door. "How long have you been ruling the underworld?" said Persephone. She stood in the center of the room, her mouth set in a firm line as she watched me. It was unsettling, but at least she'd let us in. "I don't," I said. "Henry and I got married 6 months ago. I went away for the summer, and Cronus started attacking the day I came down here. There wasn't time to finish the ceremony." Persephone made a soft noise in the back of her throat, and her eyes narrowed. "Why do you call him Henry?" I blinked. That was the last question I'd expected. "Same reason you call him Hades, I guess. It's what he told me to call him." "Greek names weren't in style anymore," said James, "and Zeus decided it was best to keep a low profile after Rome fell, so he had to adapt. I'm called James now. Aphrodite's Ava." Hera was adamant about keeping a Greek name, though. She went with Calliope after her favorite muse. It doesn't stand out as much as ours did. Persephone was silent. Adonis slipped beside her and looped her arm, so I looped his arm around her waist, but she didn't budge. I couldn't very well look away from her without being rude, so I gritted my teeth and tried to keep myself from blurting out something completely inappropriate. "Seems the world's moved on without me," she said, with a haughty little sniff. "You shouldn't act so surprised," said James. He stretched his legs and toed off his boots. Persephone wrinkled her nose, and she didn't say anything. "It's been 1,000 years. You wouldn't recognize it if you went up there." For a moment I thought I saw a flash of regret pass across her face, and my stomach twisted unpleasantly. Had she decided she didn't love Adonis as much as she thought she had? Was Ava right about Persephone's loyalty, and had she grown tired of him and wanted to move on? I couldn't see how, unless Adonis was nothing more than a pretty face. A very pretty face, but still. I didn't have time to think about that for long. Persephone turned back to me, her blue eyes icy. "So what? He picked you out of the millions of people in the world?" "Billions," said James. "It's been a while." Persephone scowled. "The point stands. Why you?" Part of me wanted to avoid this as long as possible, but she was bound to ask questions, and if I was honest with her, there was a chance she would be willing to help. If she really was bored with Adonis, maybe we'd get lucky and she'd jump at the chance to go someplace new. Either way, lying to her or withholding information wasn't going to help my cause. "I wasn't the first," I said. 11 girls were tested before me over the past century. Calliope killed them before they had a chance, and—" "Hera would never do that," interrupted Persephone. "Maybe if it was Zeus, but—" "She's in love with Henry," I said. "After you left, she thought she'd have a chance, but he didn't want to be with her, so she killed off the competition." Persephone sniffed. "You survived? You must be something special. I bet Henry's just cooing over you." Maybe it was the way she said his name or the sarcasm dripping from her voice, but something inside of me snapped. This was impossible. I wasn't going to stand around all day explaining everything to her when she wasn't listening. I would never understand why Henry loved her so much, and if she couldn't show me basic courtesy, I wasn't going to bother either. "He's only with me because I'm your sister," I said hotly. "Diana, Demeter, she's my mother. She decided to have me in a last-ditch effort to save Henry because she felt so darn guilty for what you did to him, and she didn't want to be responsible for him fading. He married me because he couldn't have you, and I was the next best thing. Thanks for rubbing my nose in it." The words were out before I could stop them, but there was no taking them back now. Besides, it was the truth. Tiptoeing around it and acting like she had nothing to do with me being born would have been stupid. I was born to be another incarnation of her, to be the version of her that even she couldn't be, but now that I was standing in front of her, I knew I would never come close. She was beautiful and graceful and put the flowers around us to shame, but at the same time, she was willing to hurt the people who loved her for the sake of her own happiness. I was at Persephone, and for the first time since meeting Henry over a year ago, I finally realized that was a good thing. I was the one who could want Adonis and say no. Overwhelming silence filled the cottage. Persephone stared at me, her eyes burning with something I couldn't identify, but I knew it wasn't good. She didn't have to tell me to leave. I turned on my heel and walked out the door. The breeze blew through the meadow, and when I took a deep breath, the smell of freesia filled me, but I was too far gone to care. Anger boiled away any sympathy I'd had for Persephone, and I didn't care if she was my sister. I'd never had a sister before, and there was no need to change that now. I heard the door swing open again and footsteps against the dirt as someone came after me. I kept going. "Kate," I said to Ava. "Kate, stop." I was halfway to the trees and she grabbed my arm. I whirled around, ready to lay into her, but the words formed a lump in my throat. "You know that isn't true," she said softly. "Henry didn't marry you because you were Persephone's sister." I tried to speak again, but all that came out was a choked sob, and my cheeks burned from humiliation. I barely spent 5 minutes with her, and already she'd reduced me to this. She's the reason I got the chance in the first place," I blubbered. "And love was never part of the deal. All I had to do was marry him, was pass, and that's all I did." Ava hugged me, and I buried my face in her shoulder, struggling not to cry more than I already was. Now that the dam had burst, however, I couldn't stop. All of the worries and tensions I'd kept bottled inside me since arriving in the underworld came spilling out, and wave after wave of sobs assaulted me, stealing every last shred of dignity I had left. I hadn't signed up for this. I didn't want to face my sister and all of the painful truths that came along with her. Even with the cancer, I'd been happy in New York with my mother. When I hadn't known I'd been her second child, a replacement for the daughter who hadn't been perfect. Now all of her hopes and expectations weighed heavily on my shoulders and my resolve cracked. I didn't want to be married out of duty or an arrangement. I loved Henry. Maybe it wasn't the sort of endless, eternal love poets wrote about and musicians sang about, but he made me stronger, made me happy, and knowing he was in my life, he'd saved me in more ways than one, and when he was with me, everything felt right. It felt real. And eventually, we could get there if he would give me a chance. Instead, he wanted to keep me at arm's length, and all the while I suffered, knowing I wasn't good enough for him to love me back, knowing I wasn't Persephone. It wasn't such a good thing when I thought about it that way. Someone cleared their throat behind Ava, and I looked up, recognizing James' blurry face through my tears. "Is everything okay?" he said, sounding like he didn't want to be here. I didn't blame him. I didn't want to be here, either. I shook my head and sniffed, wiping my face with the sleeve of my sweater. "Sorry, I can't. Not if she's going to be like that. It's bad enough already needing her and asking for her help. I can't take her acting like this, too." "You're no prize yourself," said Persephone from behind James, and I stiffened. Ava placed herself between us, and I could have sworn I heard her hiss. James held out his arms as if he expected him to hurl themselves at one another and rip each other's hair out. "Enough, both of you, all three of you. No one wants to do this, but it doesn't matter what we want, because if we don't, Cronus and Calliope will win." I stared at the wildflowers at my feet. I'd accidentally crushed one with the heel of my shoe, and I gingerly lifted my leg as if being gentle now could bring it back to life. It wasn't until disappointment shot through me that I realized I was looking for one of Henry's flowers, so he could be with me everywhere else but not here, not with Persephone. Persephone batted James' hand aside before moving closer. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice echoing through the meadow. "Not for what I said, but for what you're going through." James explained it. Of course he had. My chest tightened as another wave of sobs advanced, and I clenched my jaw in an attempt to keep it at bay. "It's fine, you didn't mean for it to happen." Eva stepped beside me and took my hand, and that was all I needed to feel even more like an idiot than I already did. Cronus could kill us all, and here I was breaking down over something no one could help. "I'm sure Mother didn't mean to make you feel that way either," said Persephone, Everything she did arranging my marriage to Hades, it was all for me and my best interests. It wasn't her fault when it didn't work out. No, it wasn't. But it seemed crass to agree with her aloud. James was right, though. Fighting like this and letting jealousy in the way wasn't going to fix anything. It didn't matter how I felt about Persephone or even how she felt about me. What mattered was doing something about Cronus and rescuing the others. It took every ounce of willpower I had to swallow my pride. Please, we need your help, I said. I know you haven't had anything to do with us for a long time, but Mom and Henry and Walter and everyone, all the rest of the original 6, Cronus and Calliope kidnapped them. She's trying to figure out how to open the gate that's keeping Cronus inside, And what? Said Persephone, and I got some small amount of satisfaction from seeing her face drain of all color. Removed from the council or not, at least she still seemed to care about them. How could I possibly help? You know where the gate is, said James. Persephone reached behind her, and Adonis was there in an instant, as if he'd appeared out of thin air. You want me to take you there? She said incredulously. There's a reason you can't find it, James. There's a reason no one but Hades and I knew where it was. I wasn't even supposed to know. He only told me in case anything happened to him. Something has happened to him, I said, and if we don't get there before Cronus decides keeping them around isn't worth it, he could kill them or worse. Persephone shook her head, and Adonis wrapped his arms around her again, burying his face in her hair. You came all this way to ask me if I could take you on a suicide mission, she said. You can't face Cronus. He'll kill you. I exchanged a look with James, and he gave me a small nod. We already faced him, I said. I think he'll leave us alone, at least until we get there. Until we get there? Said Persephone, a hint of panic in her voice. What do you mean, until we get there? He's awake enough to slip a portion of himself out, and he can attack from inside Tartarus, said James. He attacked the palace before Kate was crowned, and that was when the brothers went after them. He came after us on our way here, I added, but I made a deal with him, and I don't think he'll attack us. Her eyes narrowed, but at least she didn't ask what kind of deal. You mean you came here knowing that a darned titan with a score to settle could easily follow you, and those weren't the first words out of your mouth? You led him straight to us? He hasn't attacked us since Kate made her deal with him, said James. You're safe. Persephone slipped out of Adonis' arms and started to pace. You did this on purpose, didn't you? If I come with you, he might destroy me. If I don't, he knows where I am now, and he knows I'm the only one other than Henry who knows how to find Tartarus, so he might decide to get rid of me anyway. Why would Cronus do that? I snapped, my irritation returning full force. This was too important for her to act like she was the only person in the universe. He wants to open the gate, and Calliope has no idea how. He doesn't stand a chance unless we get there. As long as you're with us, you're safe. Persephone scowled, and she looked up at Adonis, who hadn't said a word. He nodded encouragingly, and her frown deepened. You swear he has no reason to come after us? Kate's telling the truth, said James. If Cronus didn't want us there, he would have killed us a long time ago. Persephone seemed to consider this, and finally she stalked back toward the cottage. Fine, she called, and Adonis trotted after her. But I swear to you, if anything happens to me or Adonis, I'll... What would she do? We didn't get the chance to find out. She slammed the front door shut, inches from Adonis's nose, but he didn't protest. No wonder Persephone loved it here with him so much. He put up with her. So what, does she expect us to go after her? Said Ava hotly. Because if that's the case, then we can find it on our own. I'm not groveling to anyone, especially not her. She said she'd come, said James. Patience. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Persephone stormed back out of the cottage. She paused long enough to give Adonis a deep kiss, and I turned away to give them some privacy. I wanted badly to be able to kiss Henry like that someday, or better yet, to have him kiss me like that and know he meant it. But the closer we got to Cronus, the slimmer the chances of that ever happening became. Let's go, said Persephone, and she trudged through the meadow, slinging a canvas satchel over her shoulder. It's a long walk, but I know a shortcut. James gestured for her to lead the way, and the 3 of us followed. Ava trailed in a huff, still sulking about the whole thing, but I offered her my hand. None of us said a word, and with luck, it would stay that way until we reached the gate. We'd been walking less than 15 minutes when the bickering began. It started off innocently enough, James, who seemed strangely withdrawn, but determined to be polite, asked Persephone about how she and Adonis were doing, and for a moment Persephone actually smiled. We're good, she said, really good. You'd think as long as it's been, it would get monotonous, but I guess that's the beauty of this place. Everything's so happy, and we haven't gotten bored of each other yet." Ava snorted. "That's a miracle," she muttered under her breath. I gave her hand a warning squeeze. "If you have something to say, just say it," said Persephone. "We all know you're jealous because Adonis chose me over you," but Ava let out a strangled laugh. "He chose you over me? Is that a joke?" She shook her head in disbelief. "Daddy made me let you have him." I sighed. It was like that what had happened at Eden Manor all over again, except this time Eva had gone after Persephone's boyfriend instead of Ella's brother. The result would be the same, though: hours upon hours of fighting in the cold shoulder, and I would be stuck in the middle. At least this time James was here to help. We argued about that for another hour or so, and eventually I let go of Ava's hand and tucked myself into James' embrace instead. He couldn't block out their rants and name-calling, but the weight of his arm over my shoulders helped to remind me that there was something more important going on now than which goddess Adonis loved more. "Is this why you thought Ava shouldn't come?" I said softly, and James nodded. You shouldn't. You should have seen it when Persephone came to the council to ask for permission to become mortal for him," he whispered. "It was a bloodbath." Ava refused to give Persephone her consent, even though the rest of us had agreed, so eventually Walter overruled her. He'd never done that before, and he hasn't done it since. Even Calliope, as much as she hated me, had agreed to granting me immortality. I pressed my ear against his shoulder to drown out the two of them. It worked marginally, but Ava's shrill voice dragged me back into the mess. "What do you think, James?" she said snidely. "Who's a better lover, me or Persephone?" My eyes widened, and I stepped away from James, letting his arm fall to his side. He turned scarlet and shoved his hands in his pockets, and then pain exploded in my head, and I cried out, stumbling to my knees. The forest fell away, and I plunged into blackness. Despite my panic, I knew what to expect. I was still conscious, but when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in Persephone's Eden. Instead, I was back in Cronus's cavern, and Calliope stood in front of me once again, staring right through me. "I will kill her," she snarled. "I will rip her body into little pieces and force you to watch." Startled, I whirled around to see who she was talking to, and when I saw a pair of eyes the color of moonlight staring back at me, my blood ran cold. Henry was awake. "Oh, hello." Chapter 9. Ties That Bind. A cut ran down his cheek, dripping blood onto the collar of his black shirt. But at least Henry was alive. Behind him, my mother and Sophia were changed to Walter and Philip, the four of them unconscious. I gingerly stepped around Henry, worried that he might be able to feel me. His hands were chained behind his back. He struggled against them, and the metal links were infused with fog. "You have one more chance," said Calliope, and she closed the distance between them. To his credit, he didn't back away. "Tell me how to open it, or the next time you see Kate, she'll be in pieces." Henry tugged at the chains again, but his blank expression didn't change. Calliope sneered and abruptly spun toward the fog that swirled around the gate. "I want you to find her and kill her," she said in a high, grating voice. There was no mistaking the command in her words. The cavern rumbled with vicious laughter, and Calliope's fervor wavered. Apparently, Cronus didn't like being ordered around. I glanced at Henry and saw a ghost of a smile on his lips. Did he know I was there, or did he too know how futile it was for Calliope to boss around a Titan? "I said go out and find her," she snarled, but Cronus made no move to leave. The fog threaded through the bars of the gate, and I wondered why they were there anyway, when he could still get out. Maybe not all of him, but he'd already proven that the fog was enough to do more damage than the council could handle. With a huff, she turned to face Henry again, and even I managed to crack a smile. She looked like a spoiled toddler who hadn't gotten her way, no matter how many tantrums she'd thrown. "I'll do it myself, then," she said with a sniff, and Henry's smile vanished. "They're on their way right now, and once she gets here, I'll make sure you're awake to see what I do to her. You don't want to miss it." With a wave of her hand, she sent Henry flying back toward the mouth of the cave, where the others were chained. He hit the wall hard, sending a shower of rocks into his lap, and his head slumped forward. I dashed toward him and tried in vain to remove his hair aside so I could see if his eyes were still open, but I was a ghost. Calliope couldn't kill him. She couldn't. She wanted him alive to watch me die, and she wouldn't deny herself of the pleasure of seeing him in pain like that. Of seeing me in pain. The cavern turned to black once more, and when I came to, 3 pairs of eyes peered down at me. Ava and James were used to it, but even Persephone didn't look startled. Maybe they'd explained it to her while I was out. "What did you see?" Ava said eagerly. I pushed myself onto my elbows and rubbed my throbbing head. "Calliope's trying to get Henry to tell her how to open the gate." "He isn't," I added when Ava's eyes widened. "He didn't say a word. She got frustrated and knocked him out again." "Good," said Persephone. "He won't tell her. He knows better than to risk it." "They're all there," I said, unconscious. Calliope ordered Cronus to go after me, but he refused. Persephone eyed me dubiously, but James and Ava didn't question it. "Is that all?" said James. "Did you see anything else?" "They know we're coming," I said grimly. None of them looked all that happy about it, but no one said anything. It was no surprise Calliope knew, but not when Cronus had hunted us down, and for now it didn't matter. They weren't coming for us anymore. We'd lost the element of surprise, but at least we had time to figure out a plan before we got there. James offered me his hand, and I took it, hauling myself to my feet. The forest seemed to spin around me, and I sagged against James while regaining my balance. "It'd be nice if I could control it," I muttered. "That'd make this a lot easier." "You can," said Persephone. She leaned against a tree trunk casually, as if a pebble passed out around her all the time. "Since you were immortal before all of this, it'll probably take you a lot longer to get the hang of it, but you'll get it, eventually." I bit back my retort. No use in giving her any reason to march right back to Adonis. "If you know how to do it, then why don't you tell me so we can use it to our advantage?" I said through a clenched jaw. Persephone inspected her nails. "I'll think about it." James sighed. "Persephone, please." The two of them exchanged a weighty look, and I scowled. If Persephone knew how to control that kind of power, then the only reason she had not to share it was selfishness. I had her abilities now, the ones she'd given up long ago with along with her family, her mother, and everything she loved, all for an attractive guy. I knew why she didn't like me, but that didn't give her the right to jeopardize our safety. Eventually, Persephone pushed herself off the tree and started forward, leaving the 3 of us to catch up. "Fine," she called in a sing-song voice that grated on my nerves. "I'll teach her when Ava admits I'm prettier than she is." Ava's mouth dropped open, and she stormed after her. "You little—" James offered me his arm, and I shook my head. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he walked beside me, close enough to reach out if I needed him. It was nice, his protectiveness, but I kept my eyes on the ground for the rest of the day. He'd slept with Persephone, too, and no vision was going to make me forget it. Even without trying, Persephone tainted every facet of my life and every person I loved, like a younger sister whose only things were hand-me-downs. Everything I had reeked of her, and nothing was ever going to make the smell go away. There was one upside to being with Persephone. Our surroundings didn't change, which meant I didn't have to endure watching anyone else be tortured. So when I saw the flashing lights of a colorful carnival in the distance, for a moment I thought I'd lost her. But she was still there, skipping a few yards ahead of me. A huge Ferris wheel towered above us, and the smell of popcorn wafted through the air, past the fence, over the dip in the field where we made camp. No matter how many times Persephone insisted she was tired and needed a break, I was positive she'd chosen this spot because of the bright lights and the hint of the future she'd never had a chance to see. It hadn't been her Eden before, and that was the only explanation for why it would be here now. More than anyone down here, she would know how to manipulate her afterlife to see that sort of thing. James and I collected wood this time, leaving Ava and Persephone to continue to argue. It would have been easier to let them create kindling for the fire, but I needed to get away from them, and apparently he did too. I found another colorful flower nestled in a grove, and I smiled faintly as I inhaled its cotton candy scent and placed it in my pocket. Henry was still alive, and no matter how angry Calliope got, she wasn't going to kill him. After collecting an armful of sticks, I lingered near the banner that hung above the entranceway of the carnival, debating whether or not to go inside. As much as I didn't want to admit it, I'd never been to a real carnival before either, and I was itching to see what it was like. "I'm sorry," said James behind me, and I jerked in surprise. A few of the sticks I'd gathered fell to the ground, and as I picked them up, James knelt beside me to help. "I've got it," I snapped. James stood and stepped away, but he didn't leave. Instead, he waited until I collected the rest, but when I straightened and headed toward another promising patch of tall grass, I followed. "I should have told you about me and Persephone," he said. "If I'd had any idea how you felt about her, I would have, and I'm sorry." "Is this the point where you tell me that it meant nothing?" I said waspishly. He paused as if he were choosing his words carefully. "No, it isn't. While it was happening, it did mean something." I clutched the sticks so tightly that a few of them snapped. "You really need to learn when it's better to lie instead of tell the truth." "Don't see why," he said. "Then you'd be mad I wasn't honest." He was right, of course, but that didn't make me feel any better. "So what happened?" I said. "What was so appealing about that selfish cow that she had half the council wrapped around her little finger?" We walked across the field, neither of us saying a word, as the tinny sound of carnival music floated through the breeze. Ava and Persephone's shrieks of outrage and indignation faded into the background until I could almost pretend that it was only the three of us, me, James, and the giant elephant that followed us. "We were friends until she married Henry," he said at last, after several minutes passed. "She and I were the youngest members of the council at the time, and we got along well. We were close enough in age that neither one of us had been through the rites of passage as the rest of them had experienced, and," he shrugged, "it was easy, that was all." I spotted what looked like a broken tree branch, and I knelt down to pick it up the pieces. He joined me, his eyes focused on the ground. "When her marriage to Henry started to fall apart, I was there for her," he said. "I spent a lot of time in the underworld, guiding the dead to the right place, and when she needed a shoulder to cry on, she came to me." He hesitated. "When Henry offered to let her leave for 6 months of the year, she jumped at the chance, and we started to spend time together above as well. One thing turned into another," he trailed off, and he didn't need to finish. "How long did it last?" I said, as nausea filled the pit of my stomach. James had been the first person to cheat with her. He was closer to Henry than any other member of the council, and he must have known what it would do to him. But he'd done it anyway. He'd let Persephone use him like that. He'd done more than let her hurt Henry. He'd helped. "A few 100 years," he said, but he must have seen the look on my face because he added hastily, "On and off, and only during the spring and summer. Eventually she met Adonis, and that whole mess happened, and I was left in the dust." "Poor you," I muttered. He smiled faintly. I found the last stick in the immediate area, and together we stood. "No, not poor me," he said. "We were always better as friends anyway. Besides, it made working with Henry awkward. It was one thing to sneak around behind Henry's back, but it was another to have a relationship with his wife when he was fully aware of it." "He knew it? He didn't try to kill you?" "Of course not," said James, chuckling. I didn't see what was so funny about it. "Everything's an open secret with us, Kate. You'll see eventually." I wasn't so sure I wanted to anymore. If I managed to make it out of this alive, but it wouldn't matter anyway. I decided right then and there that if I stayed, if Henry still wanted me to be here after all this mess was cleaned up, I would never cheat on him, not even during the summer, and especially not with James. Yet I'd spent my entire 6 months away with James, hadn't I? What had been for me a break from the mayhem with a friend could have easily been construed as a romantic vacation by Henry. If he really hadn't checked in on me the entire time I'd been in Greece with James, oh God, the things Henry must have imagined. My mind reeled, and every emotion I'd started to develop for James vanished. "You knew what Greece would look like to him, and you didn't warn me?" James winced. "It didn't matter. You and I both knew it wasn't anything more than friends, and that what Henry wanted to assume. Of course it was what he'd assume." Without thinking, I hurled one of the sticks at James. It glanced harmlessly off his chest, and for once I didn't care about hurting him. He was a god, he'd get over it, and it was nothing compared to the horror and guilt and shame churning inside of me. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" "What is it, James? Do you want him to be alone? Do you want him to fade? Do you want to rule the underworld after all?" "I didn't do it on purpose," he said, bending to pick up the stick I'd thrown. "And I don't want to hurt Henry, but more than that, I don't want anyone to hurt you either. You have a choice, Kate, that no one else is pointing out to you because they don't see that Henry's doing to you. He's hurting you, and there's no guarantee it's ever going to get better." His words were a slap in the face, and I choked on my reply. He was saying everything I didn't want to hear, everything I was trying so desperately to ignore. "It will get better," I said shakily, fury rising up inside of me until I could taste it. As soon as he understands that I have no interest in ever being with you, I'm sure he'll come around." To my immense satisfaction, James winced. "Believe what you want, but your deal with Henry is clear. He has you for 6 months, no more. You can do whatever you want during the summer, and he has no say in it. That doesn't give me the right to break his darn heart." I stalked off toward camp. "And it doesn't give you the right to make me." "I can't believe you, James. Out of all the nasty things to do, playing me like that. I wasn't playing anyone." He hurried to catch up, and I refused to look at him. "I'm not doing this for fun, Kate. You're the one who invited me to go to Greece, and I said yes because I liked spending time with you, and because I wanted to help you see what you'd be missing if you decided to come back. You can't yell at me for that. I behaved. No matter how badly I wanted to kiss you, I never did." "Don't say that." I spun around, and he came within inches of plowing into me. "I'm not Persephone. I'm not going to cheat on Henry, no matter what season it is, and I don't care how much time passes. That isn't going to change." "What if things never get better?" said James. "What if Henry never loves you the way you deserve? What happened to Persephone? I don't want to see you repeat her mistakes. You shouldn't have to go through that kind of pain, you or Henry both. He's set in his ways, and he's never going to change. There's no shame in admitting your marriage isn't working. Just because we have some problems doesn't mean it isn't working." He sighed. "All I'm saying is that you have a choice, Kate. Understand that, please, and don't go running in the direction of Henry because you think it can fix him." "I'm not," I snarled. "I'm with him because I love him." "Then it shouldn't be too hard for you to make me a promise," said James. He was crazy if he thought I was going to promise him anything, though. "Think about the possibility of living your own life instead of the life Henry and the rest of the council want you to live. And I don't mean consider it for half a second. I mean imagine what it'll be like if Henry never loves you like you love him. Imagine how it'll feel coming home to a cold bed and a husband who would rather do anything else than spend time with you, because like it or not, if you stay, that's a possibility, and in return I'll stop bothering you." I opened my mouth to tell him to go himself, but nothing came out. Instead, my eyes welled up, and before I could stop myself, words flew from my tongue, tangled and thick and completely out of my control. "You really think it'll be like that? You think he doesn't love me?" James pursed his lips and reached out to touch me, but I pulled back. "He loves you, but yes, it's a possibility he'll never be there for you the way you want him to be. There's a risk that this time around you'll be Henry, and he would be Persephone. So I would be the one left yearning for someone who didn't want me." I wanted to snap and tell James how wrong he was, that I had a pocket full of flowers to prove it, but I couldn't. Henry could send me through enough pleasance through fill the underworld 100 times over, but it would never be a substitute for his touch, for the feel of his arms wrapped around me like Adonis had wrapped his arms around Persephone. "All I'm asking is that you really think about whether or not this is the life you want," said James softly. "If you decide you'd rather not, no one can force you. And I'm not asking that you spend your life with me either. I just don't want you to be tied down to someone who doesn't appreciate you the way that you deserve to be. And you should be the one in control of your destiny, Kate, not any of us. Especially not Henry." I clutched my pile of sticks to my chest and said around the lump in my throat, "Okay, I'll think about it, but stop talking like that, okay? Please. Not when Henry isn't here to defend himself." James nodded once, and that was enough for me. Taking a shuddering breath, I pulled myself together and squared my shoulders. Henry would have a fair shot. He would have a chance to prove James wrong, and when he did, James' argument would be obliterated. Everything would be all right again. "Did you at least tell Henry nothing happened in Greece?" I said. Pleased the edge of my voice went back. I could break down another time. His silence was all I needed to hear. With a muted screech, I stormed back toward camp, ignoring the string of apologies James spilled behind me. As long as Henry wanted me, I would remain faithful, but if he didn't, if this life together was a chain to him, then the best thing I could do was set him free. At the same time, my mother's expectations were a heavy burden for me to carry, and thousands of years was a long time to love a single person. It was entirely possible that Henry had the same reservations that held him back, and if he really did believe that James and I had become involved during our trip to Greece, then that was the first thing I'd have to set right the moment I had a chance. Either way, I loved Henry. Maybe one day he would believe that. When I reached camp, I dropped my sticks into the center and sat heavily down on a tree stump. James trailed in after me, and once he'd arranged the kindling into another tepee, he started the fire. It would be impossible to sleep with the sounds of the carnival in the background, but Persephone didn't seem to need it either. Another advantage of dying, I supposed. Ava and Persephone continued to bicker, but Ava at least seemed to realize that something was wrong, and after another round of retorts, she quit. Persephone tried to egg her on, but once it became clear that Ava wasn't in the mood, Persephone sat on the tree stump next to mine and sulked. "How many visions have you had?" said Persephone, and the sticks burst into flame. James crouched on the ground a few feet away, and through the fire I could see shadows and the deep lines etched into his face, making him appear years older than he was supposed to look. I shrugged. "3, I think, all to the same place." "Have you been able to control them yet?" she said, and I shook my head. "Do they happen at regular intervals?" "No." I stared at my hands, unable to stomach watching James. "Did you ever sleep with Henry?" Persephone didn't say anything for a moment, and when I glanced at her, her face looked oddly contorted in the firelight. "It's okay," I said. "You don't have to answer." Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and she straightened, her expression smoothing out. "Have you?" I nodded. "Once, in March. It's October now," I added, "I think." Persephone tugged on one of her blonde curls and sighed. "I used to be able to tell. Even after I died, my hair changed colors with the seasons, but after a while it stopped." She smiled faintly. "It's stuck on summer now." That explained why her hair had been a different color in Henry's reflection. "Wait, what season did it turn strawberry blonde?" I said. "Fall," she said. "It grew redder with the autumn, and in the dead of winter it was black. It lightened into brown in the spring." Of course, James had explained to me that a reflection wasn't an accurate depiction of what had happened. It was whatever the Creator wanted, and what Henry wanted was for Persephone to be smiling when she saw him each fall. "I didn't mean to sleep with him," I said, and I paused. "That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Part of the test was lust, and Henry had me so well protected that Calliope didn't have the chance to kill me, so instead she sabotaged the test by giving us an aphrodisiac." Persephone clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "You've certainly had it rough, haven't you?" "What do you mean?" I said wearily. Was she being sarcastic? "Well, I assume you love him," she said, and I nodded. "It's good you're there for him. He deserves to have someone who loves him." She hesitated and said reluctantly, as if she were admitting some deep, dark secret, "I worry about him sometimes. It's terrible that the one time you've been with him had to be because of an aphrodisiac." She glared at Ava. "Aphrodite ruins everything." "It wasn't me," said Ava, her eyes wide. "I wasn't even there." "It's named after you." I started to retort, but Ava huffed and remained silent. After a moment, Persephone gestured at her dismissively. "Regardless, with what you've said earlier about Mother only having you because of me, and then all of this, well, I would imagine it isn't easy, so you have my sympathies." I don't know what to say to that. Maybe after an entire day of bickering with Ava, she was all argued out. "That's the nicest thing you've said to me." "Don't expect me to keep it up," she said with a snort. "To answer your question, yes, once." It took me a moment to figure out what question she was talking about, and when it did, my mouth opened, but no sound came out, so Calliope had been wrong after all. Even though I'd known Persephone and Henry had been married, it was a punch to the gut to hear that I hadn't been Henry's only. The last thing I had that I didn't have to share with her evaporated. Once again, Persephone had gotten there first, and all I had were her leftovers. "It was awful," said Persephone. Her hand lingered between us, as if she could sense how upset I was, but she dropped it back in her lap. "It was our wedding night, and we didn't talk about it. It just happened. It was expected. Both of us were too shy to ask the other if we wanted it. We both assumed." I was silent. I didn't want to think about how badly things would have gone for Henry and me if there hadn't been that spark between us. His guilt and anger had been bad enough the morning after. Ava tactfully moved to the other side of the fire, taking a seat beside James. They bowed their heads together, and the soft sound of their conversation wafted towards us, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I cleared my throat. "I would have waited if I'd had the choice, but I didn't not want to. That was the point I realized I loved him, and for what it was nice. It was really nice." "Good," said Persephone distantly, staring into the fire. "Hades deserves that. He deserves you." I shook my head. It didn't matter what Henry deserved. What mattered was who Henry wanted, and so far that didn't seem to be me. It was the morning after that was so terrible. When Henry realized what had happened, he freaked out, panicked. I amended it. Persephone's confused look. He apologized and took off, and that was the last I saw of him for days. The only reason he came back was because Calliope killed me, and he went to the underworld to get me. Persephone grimaced, and she said in a small voice, "No, it isn't." "No, what isn't?" I said. "No, that isn't the only reason he came back," she sighed. "When we consummated our marriage, I was the one to freak out." She made a face at the expression. We hadn't been married 12 hours, and already I'd run back to Mother. She talked me into staying and giving it a shot, and she must have said something to Hades because we never tried it again. I slept in a separate room, and he never pressed the issue. On the other side of the fire, James and Ava grew quiet. "I'm sorry," I said. "You shouldn't have had to stay with Henry if you didn't want to." So that was why James was insisting I acknowledge my choice to leave if I didn't want this. He had already told me it'd been because of Persephone, of course, but hearing it from her made the pieces fall into place. James was protecting me the best he knew how, exactly like he had the year before. When I thought I'd failed a test, I'd tried to leave Eden Manor, wanting to see my mother before she died. Henry had talked me out of it. James hadn't known that I'd stayed out of my own free will, and it had been important enough to him to blow his cover. "I was young," said Persephone. "I thought love happened immediately. It was my first time living without Mother, and I hadn't known what to expect. On top of that, being in the underworld and away from the sun made me miserable. It was the perfect storm, and unfortunately Hades and I both got caught up in it." She shook her head ruefully. "I never gave him a chance after that. He tried so hard. You wouldn't believe the lengths he went to in order to see me happy. But it was never enough. He was never enough." It was dark now. The glow from the carnival and the pitiful fire were the only sources of light, and when I looked at Persephone again, it was hard to see her face. "He loved you anyway, though," I said. "He still loves you more than anything." "I'm not so sure any more." She sat up straighter and looked toward the sky. I followed her gaze, and once my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw that the stars weren't in their usual pattern. "You said he went down to the underworld to get you," said Persephone. "Were you really dead?" I nodded. "It was night, and I was in the park. Mom and I used to visit back at home. Mom traded her life for mine." "Her mortal life," I corrected. "But the body she was using was dying anyway." "It doesn't matter," said Persephone. "He wasn't supposed to do that. While I ruled with him, we only made a few exceptions, and even then there were so many caveats that no one ever really made it back to the surface. He violated everything he stood for since the dawn of humanity to save your life." Across the fire, James cleared his throat. "She's telling the truth, Kate," he said. "He shouldn't have saved you." He had anyway. Smiling, I wrapped my arms around my body as the chilly night air settled over me. I didn't know how that ranked as far as romantic gestures went, but I was pretty sure it was at least as high as getting me a puppy. "Can you tell me how to control the visions?" I said to Persephone, feeling lighter than I had since coming down to the underworld. Even if saving me hadn't cost Henry much more than his rules and his pride, Persephone thought that it was a big deal, and that mattered more to me than it should have. He would have done the same thing for her, I was sure, but he hadn't. I still had some piece of him that she didn't. "It's easy," she said with a shrug. "You have to focus on where you want to go or that person you want to find." "You can find people?" I said, amazed. Persephone nodded. "That's probably how you're doing it, thinking about Henry. It takes practice, but once you get it, it'll come easier each time. Try," she said. "Think of someone you want to see and let yourself drift to it." As easy as Persephone seemed to think it was, I had no idea how to drift into anything. Still warm from discovering that Henry had broken the rules for me, I closed my eyes and pictured his face in my mind, and nothing. "It's not working," I said. "Relax," said Persephone. "It won't happen right away." Apparently it wasn't going to happen at all. I tried again and again until all of my contentment drained away, leaving me with a depressing lack of self-worth. My head pounded from concentrating so hard, and the more Persephone pushed me, the more out of reach I felt. "It won't come naturally at first," she said several minutes later, which was about the most encouraging thing she said so far. "You've never had abilities before." Why that made such a huge difference, I wasn't sure, though I was clear I wasn't going to get it that night. "I'm going for a walk," I said, and I stood. Along with a killer headache, my leg throbbed again, and I shook it out. "I'll bring everyone back some cotton candy." Hugging myself from warmth, I headed toward the carnival entrance. Of course, none of this was supposed to be easy. If it was, any girl could have done it, and the test wouldn't have been necessary. Still, I felt like a complete and utter failure, slinking away while the three of them undoubtedly whispered about how I couldn't do it. Resentment flared up inside of me, and I forced myself to suppress it. It wasn't their fault I couldn't control my visions, and if Persephone was telling the truth, I'd get it eventually, but I needed it now, not days or weeks or months in the future. If we didn't know what was going on with Calliope, a loud crash echoed through the cavern. Startled, I looked up toward the sound, and a sick sense of dread filled the pit of my stomach. Stars were falling from the sky. Chapter 10. Fisher. Kate! James' frantic voice rose above the sound of crashing rock and ringing bells, and I darted out of the carnival, covering my head instinctively. The ground shook beneath me, but there were no signs of the fallen stars. I smacked into James. "What's going on?" I said, unable to keep the panic out of my voice. "I don't know." He wrapped his arm around me, and together we hurried back to the fire. "Whatever it is, I've never seen anything like it before." The flames in the fire shook with each crash. It echoed through the cavern, and the rocks weren't landing in the field or the forest or anywhere near the carnival. Ava and Persephone stared upward into the sky wearing identical expressions of alarm. If it wasn't happening here, then where, without warning, the world dropped out from around me and I was on the surface again. Instead of the dense forest that surrounded Eden, I stood on a cliff overlooking the bluest water I'd ever seen as wave after wave rolled to the white shore. James and I had only spent a few days on this particular island, but the ancient place within the distance and the sharp drop into the water were unmistakable. This was Greece. "Did you feel that?" Someone shouted behind me. "I told you this would happen, I told you." Dylan dashed past me, dressed in a cargo shorts and a tank top, the other members of the council all wearing similar outfits, clustered around something a few feet away. I inched closer to see. Had I been transported back up here somehow without realizing it? Once I was close enough, I set my hand on Ella's shoulder. It went right through her. I was a ghost again, and this was a vision, but it wasn't the one I'd wanted. "He's breaking through," said Irene. She and several of the others held out their hands toward the ground, and a jolt of fear ran down my spine. They formed a ring around the crack in the earth. It couldn't have been more than a few feet long, but tendrils of fog slithered up through it, flicking like the tongue of a snake as if they were tasting the air itself. Cronus. The remaining members of the council held out their hands as they'd done back in the palace, and the tendrils twisted like they were annoyed, but they finally disappeared back into the ground. "He's done it," said Irene, wiping the sweat from her brow. "He's cracked the surface." "Are we sure it goes all the way down?" said Theo. "How else could he come up like that?" said Dylan. "Honestly, I am the only one with a brain here?" Nicholas, Ava's husband, gave him a warning look. Dylan rolled his eyes and kicked a bit of dirt back into the crack. "Do you think Calliope found a way to release him?" said Ella in a frightened voice that didn't sound like her at all. "If she did, then this is pointless," said Dylan. "Then we have to assume she didn't," said Irene. Her red hair seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, and for the first time since I'd met, it was a mess. They all looked disheveled and exhausted. "We have to keep going as planned, so Cronus can obliterate us as soon as he finds out we're working against him," said Dylan. "So Cronus never gets the chance." Irene waved her hand over the crack, and it filled back up with dirt. Seconds later, however, it started to empty like the top of an hourglass as the dirt fell into the underworld. "He's really done it," said Theo, and he set a protective hand on Ella's back. "He has his ways out." Irene grimaced. "Maybe so, but also means we know for certain where he's going to come out, and with any luck, we'll have time to finish setting our trap up." "Setting it up where?" said Dylan. "Around the entire island?" "If we have to." Dylan groaned and stalked off, leaving the others to mill about. Xander, who'd acted as one of my bodyguards back in Eden, had been quiet up until now, raked his fingers through his hair. "We're all going to die." "No, we're not," said Irene. "Not if we do this right and work together." "And if the others are already dead?" said Ella shakily. Irene narrowed her eyes, and with an irritated gesture she filled the crack with dirt again and turned away. "We have no way of knowing, so we have to keep going and hope they're not. We don't have a choice." "Yes, we do," called Dylan as he sat on the edge of the cliff, his legs dangling. "We don't try to fight, and we hope that Cronus doesn't kill us, too." Before anyone could say anything else, Grease and the sunshine fell away, and I once again found myself in the darkness of the underworld. "It was Cronus," I said as I struggled to sit up. James, Ava, and Persephone all stared at me, but this time they weren't hovering. We were back at the campfire, and the trembles and the crash had stopped for now. It would only be a matter of time before Cronus tried again, though. He broke through to the surface. Ava went white, and Persephone turned away from me, exactly like Irene had turned away from the proof that Cronus was speeding toward victory. "How far is the gate to Tartarus?" said James. "I don't know for sure," said Persephone. "A few days away, at least." "We need to get moving." James offered me his hand, and I took it long enough to let him help me up. As much as I wanted to stay angry with him, I could deal with it when we got back to the palace. If we got back to the palace. "The others are setting a trap for him on an island," I said. "They're fighting about it." "But they're still going to try," said James, and I nodded. "Good, at least that's something." We packed up camp, and as soon as we were on our way toward the spot where the sky had fallen, Persephone fell into step beside me. "Were you able to control it?" I shook my head. "I didn't have time to try." She made a disapproving sound at the back of her throat, but to her credit she didn't push it. "You're definitely doing it subconsciously," she said. "I had to work at it in the beginning too, but you're seeing what you want when you want to see when you want to see it. You found out where the crash came from, anyhow." I didn't answer. No matter what I saw, it wouldn't change what was happening. The best it could do is give us a fair warning, and even that wasn't important. We also knew what we were up against. The only thing we could do, like Irene and Dylan and the others, was try our best and hope that it worked. We walked for days, but it felt like weeks. If I'd still been mortal, my body would have been so sore that I wouldn't have been able to move, let alone keep up with James and Persephone's brisk pace, but I managed. Every few hours another crash would echo through the underworld, growing louder each time and spurring me on. "It's the thinnest spot in the ceiling of the underworld," said Persephone as we trudged through the endless forest. "Hades opened it when they initially captured Cronus, but now it's how they got him into the prison in the first place. Hades should have reinforced it when he had the chance." I bit my lip to keep from snapping at her. This wasn't Henry's fault. He'd had no reason to suspect that a member of his family would betray the others and awaken Cronus, and if Calliope couldn't open the gate by herself, then he probably thought that was all the security he needed. It was before Calliope had gone inside. For the most part, we walked in silence. Even Ava and Persephone quit bickering, and when we had to stop, it was for no more than a few minutes at a time. I didn't need to sleep anymore, but by the time the crashes were barely a mile away, all I wanted to do was curl up, close my eyes, and never wake up again. That was exactly what would happen if Calliope got her way, plus a little blood and a lot of pain. Nearly every time we stopped, there was a flower waiting for me, and before anyone else could see it, I slipped it into my pocket with the others. They seemed to shrink as we went along, making room for the new ones, and each gave me hope that everything would be okay. Henry and my mother were hanging on. They would survive, and once we got there, we wouldn't be alone in our fight to subdue Calliope and Cronus. One afternoon, in the middle of the forest, Persephone held up her hand, and the four of us stopped. "It's this way," she said, pointing to her left. "It's close." She stepped around a few trees until she reached a thick cluster of bushes. Crouching down, she pushed them aside, revealing a black rock behind it, the cavern wall. My heart pounded. "This is the edge," she said, running her hand tenderly over the stone. "There should be a crack around here somewhere." Oh, her hand disappeared into the seemingly solid rock, but when she pulled it back out, it was intact. "It's here," she said. "It's wide enough for us to squeeze through if we go in one at a time." "How far does it go?" said Ava nervously. "I don't know," said Persephone. "I've never been through it." She straightened and brushed the dirt off her dress. "Well, are we going?" Ava linked my arm in hers, and James glanced at us. "Kate, you're staying here," he said. I snorted. "Yeah, right." He reached out to place his hand on my shoulder, and I jerked away from his touch. "I'm serious," he said. "Calliope will try to kill you the minute she sees you, and you'll be a liability." I turned to Ava for support, but she stared intently at the ground, worrying, her bottom lip between her teeth. "You too?" I said, and I slipped my arm from hers. "So what? You both think we are going to waltz in there and save the day? But if I come with you—" "If you come, you'll die no matter what happens to us," said James. "You know that." "I made a deal with Cronus." "Do you really think he'll uphold his end of it?" said Ava. "James is right. Calliope wants you dead. And as long as she can focus on that, she'll be distracted. Once you're gone, she'll get on with her plan, and then there's no telling what could happen." "You have no experience," said James, "no abilities you can control. If you go in there, the best thing that could happen is Calliope killing you quickly." "I didn't come all this way to sit tight while you get yourself slaughtered," I said, clenching my fists. "Then what did you come all this way for?" said Persephone. "For all intents and purposes you're useless, and you're smart enough to know that. So why did you come? The only thing you'll be good for in there is dying." She stopped, and her eyes widened a fraction of an inch. "You're going to offer Calliope a trade, aren't you?" James gave me an accusing look, and Ava's mouth dropped open in disbelief. My cheeks burned, but I refused to look away. "No," I said with as much conviction as I could muster. But Persephone shook her head anyway. "You're an idiot. An absolute idiot. I don't care what kind of deals you made with Cronus, or how badly Calliope wants you dead. All bets are off the moment you go in there." "If you're dead, Henry will fade too," said Ava. You're the only reason he's still alive, and he won't be able to live with the guilt of you dying for him. You have to understand, if Henry fades, we won't stand a chance against Cronus," added James. "Even if I did take his place, I'm not one of the 6. I don't have the power to keep Cronus contained while he's awake. Not like Henry does. We can't risk that." My eyes prickled with hot tears. I blinked to keep them from spilling over, but it was useless. I wiped my cheeks and glared at the 3 of them, anger and frustration boiling inside of me. "So that's it? I stay out here and wait? What happens if you all die? What am I supposed to do then?" "That won't happen," said Persephone with a sniff. "There's only one way to deal with Calliope, and that's to give her what she wants. Since we can't hand you over, we'll have to offer her the next best thing." "And what's that?" I said bitterly. "Convince Henry to love her and make her his queen instead of me?" Persephone huffed. "Hardly. I'm going to open the gate." And before any of us had the chance to stop her, she winked and disappeared through the wall. Okay. And now I've read to chapter 11, and that's how much I was planning on reading tonight. So I'm going to go to bed now, and thank you for listening. I don't know when I'm going to read more of it, but when I read more of it, it will be probably from chapter 11 to chapter 16. So that will be part 3. And then there will be a part 4 where I will read the last few chapters of it. But for now, I'm going to go. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.